So in our very intimate session here, we're very glad to welcome everyone to our session this afternoon. We have a lot of interesting information that we simply we'd like to get out to you and provoke some thoughts. Maybe at the end, depending on how speed goes, we'll have some time to be able to take questions from the audience for the panel that we have up here. It doesn't work. Which way do I push? Technical error. Somebody, no, that went back to the beginning. Okay. And you thought we were going to do finger puppets.
PowerPoint experts in the room.
Okay, we should be good now. Sorry, guys.
Okay. All right. The title of our session that we're going to be going through is Water Above, Water Below, Rethinking Urban Ecology in a Changing Estuary. And as you saw from my the little thing here, I'm Chuck Harman. I'm a senior biologist, vice president with SPWS. I am found over in one of our New Jersey offices. And that's interesting. I thought these were going to be at the end. We are being hosted by Con Ed. That was it. and we still go through.
Shame on us for trying to be fancy.
Yeah.
No, and you just thought we were going to have something exciting to see. Should be some slides right after mine. Ah. Okay, that looks about right. So yes, you saw the picture of me. So again, welcome to our session here. Just so you introduce the speakers, and each one of them is going to have a chance in a second to introduce themselves. We have Christine Angelini, who is a vice president for environmental advisory at AECOM. Heather Gierloff from the Hudson River Estuary Coordinator, New York State DEC. Erin Morey, who's Director of Climate Resiliency Planning with MTA Construction and Development. And we have Jeff Tabor, who's a Senior Principal and Coastal Engineer from the environmental consulting firm Stantec. We went the wrong way. Okay. So we'll just see. The buttons are reversed. So, yes, they are. So, no, we'll just present. We'll go. Don't mess with that. We'll just pick this up, and we just have to remember to push the button going in the wrong way. For anyone who has ever seen any of the information that has come out of NOAA, this to me, and I saw this at a coastal project I was working on looking at sea level impacts to coastal marshes down in the E.B. Forsyth National Wildlife Refuge. And this was a similar one to Atlantic City. But to me, there's not a lot of discussion, I think. I'll be presumptuous at this in terms of as time goes by, sea level is rising. You can always argue as to the sources or what's how it occurs. The reality of it is that it's going up, and it has gone up continuously through the entire industrial age of the world and this country. So, the issue that we're going to be talking about here is that this panel is bringing together some people who work at very different points in the hydrologic system, estuary governance, ecological science, infrastructure ownership, and coastal engineering. The tension we'd like to explore is what happens when these systems no longer behave the way our institutions assume they do. So when there are issues related to higher water tables and surface flooding, the water above and the water below become very much connected. So the sea level rise, there are some very drastic impacts that's going to happen. I think the bottom point, which is really should have been the top key, is that, what we're really looking at discussing here today are adaptive management and mitigation issues. So if you look at, what science forecasts is going to come in the coming years, and it's really amazing when, at least to me, when I look at it and say, that's not that many years in the future, where you're talking about some extremely serious ramifications if, the projections are correct, that you will actually see, as a New Jerseyite, I did happen to, kind of bring up a lot of the points here from my state. The guys here are mostly from New York, or at least talking about it, so you'll get your fair share of the Empire State. But the Garden State has equal issues. In some ways, they're a little bit different. They're a little bit more challenging because whereas, in the New York City metropolitan area, you're trying to pound a lot of water into a very rigid urban infrastructure, whereas over on the other side of the Hudson, you're talking about pounding a lot of water into areas that support about 1/3 of the public infrastructure within the state, all of which is going to be very subject to flooding, even at normal high tide, in the coming years. So as we get into this, the first thing I'd like to do is to introduce Heather and let her talk a little bit about, she has some slides here that she'd like to run through. So Heather?
All right, the guinea pig. Is this working? Okay. Welcome. Glad to be here today. I work for the DEC. I'm the Hudson River Estuary Coordinator. So my role is to supervise the Hudson River Estuary Management Program. We're made up of 4 programs that are all Hudson focused, and we do everything from project reviews in marine habitat to fish population monitoring with our fisheries unit, the research reserve, which is water quality monitoring, restoration priorities, and piloting new ideas, as well as community engagement with water conservation, climate resilience, and land conservation, and lands conservation. So the next slide. Okay, and with that, we also recognize that the river is incredibly dynamic. The program we are is the Hudson River Estuary Program, goes 153 miles up to the Troy Dam, tidally influenced twice a day. You guys all experience that here in New York City as well. The salt front comes up to generally Bear Mountain, but last year we had a drought year and we had persistent salt front all the way up to Poughkeepsie. So an incredibly dynamic system. And our program is dedicated to monitoring that system so we can all better understand how it may change, but also what's happening each and every day so we can plan for the future. And some of these monitoring elements are here on the screen. We look at the water quality through our Hudson River Environmental Conditions Observing System, or RECOS. The Hudson River Sustainable Shorelines Project is a project that was started in 2008 and is looking at best management practices for creating sustainable shorelines that are just sustainable for the river, but also landowners and shoreline managers. We look at and work with NOAA for our elevation in the tides. So you can see that we have a couple of tide stations we operate on the Hudson. And last but certainly not least, we're monitoring tidal wetlands to have a better understanding on their trends over time.
All right, turn it to Erin.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, I'm Erin Morey. I'm Director of Climate Resilience Planning at MTA Construction and Development. So construction and development is the capital arm of the MTA. We are charged with implementing our $68 billion 5-year capital program. What our team does is we evaluate climate risk and make sure that climate resilience and sustainability are integrated into that massive capital program. So this first slide, one of the initiatives that I manage is our subway stormwater management program, which is very exciting to me personally, and I'm sure to others as well, as you experience flooding on the subway when it rains heavy. So I wanted to provide this as some context about what I'll be talking about today. So our subway system, about 63% of it is underground. And the way that it was built, we have these openings, right? We have these subway street vents and we have these street entrances, both of which are necessary to run service. Street vents are also there for to avoid fire. So if there's ever a fire in a tunnel, it helps to ventilate, dissipate that fire, so it's fire safety. So these are very important for service, but obviously they become pathways for flooding during heavy rain. And that's why we see flooding, and I'm often asked, why does it flood? Well, because we have these major openings, and when things like catch basins are clogged, or the sewer has reached capacity, or street curbs are low, that's when we see stormwater just overtop those infrastructure items and then go into our system. So we become a default sewer system. Next slide, please. And then you see what you see on the left, which is cascading stormwater through our vents into our stations. And then when it's really heavy during Ophelia and Ida, we see that our tunnels actually fill with water, and then we have to stop service. We have to cut the power from our third rail system and stop running service because it's unsafe to run service at that time. Fortunately, we do have a really great passive mitigation toolbox, as you see on the right, where we rely on just elevating those steps and elevating the profile of our street vents. And just doing that helps to keep those large cloudburst events and all that stormwater runoff from the surface from getting down into our system. So I'll talk more about that in the panel. Thank you.
Okay, Jeff.
Thank you again, Jeff Tabor with Stantec. I'm the director of our coastal engineering program. I've been doing sustainable shoreline work for the better part of 30 years. Before it was called nature-based sustainable living, we were doing projects that address these very issues. Next slide. And I've got a few slides I just want to put out that entice, hopefully, some discussion with the panel and the audience. Just bringing the engineering piece of this sustainable shorelines, flooding, flood prevention to the table, and just some real quick rules of thumb in approaching a project. It really needs to be a data-driven process. There are a lot of stakeholder interest, political interest on projects, but really the data, what the data says, what your analyses provide you, really needs to drive the decision process. Certainly, there's going to be a plethora of influences from a variety of sources, but allow the data, the analysis, the calculations, the tools that we all have to really drive the main decisions. Also, think long term. Most projects, there's an immediate need following a storm or some event, and it needs to be addressed immediately. Take that, obviously, under consideration, but also consider a long term. How do we want this project to be in decades from now, 20, 30, 50 years, and make sure that is also considered. And then lastly, think of it as a systems approach. And I know later the panel will get into this. It's not just that immediate need of a flooding issue or erosion, but how is the inland stormwater affected? How is groundwater impacted? What is climate change projections? Bring a holistic approach to any project. And then goals, I'll run through very quickly. We'll below show some examples here in a moment, but stabilizing your shorelines through slopes. As you see along the Hudson, New York City, New Jersey, as well, a lot of vertical structures, right? Filling of lands over the last 100, 200 years. We're bringing back sloped approaches to shoreline stabilization and protection. Habitat enhancement, bringing elements of habitat, environmental uplift and benefits back to estuaries, rivers, and shorelines. Ecosystem connectivity, right? As you do projects, they'll build on one another, and you'll have wetland or marsh corridors start to build throughout the U.S. or your shoreline. And then lastly, also improving community outreach, communication, and access to project areas. A vertical wall is not something you launch a kayak or have an educational component to, but bringing back more robust in terms of environmental projects can do that. And then finally on this slide on the right, it's really two components. It's the physical side of a project and the environmental side, right? What is the physical impacts or influences to your project? The water movement, the waves, the climate changes Charles mentioned. How are those physical aspects? The sediment movement, what's happening in your project area? And then equally, on the other side, what are the environmental indicators in your project area? And I'm going to show some examples. What used to be there? What do you want it to be now? What is something that could potentially be an uplift or environmental enhancement? Next slide. So I'll just run through quickly 3 examples showing sustainable shorelines. This is a heavily urbanized area. This is a water treatment facility that is bulkheaded off. Clearly, it was filled over 75 years ago, and this project was presented and now was built this year to bring in multiple areas. One, to protect the shoreline, but also, most importantly, to enhance the environment, to bring in a marsh system, provide stability to the shoreline. And you don't see, but to the left, there is a fishing pier, or you can't see. And then to the right, there's a new park system that's going to be developed. So this is going to bolt together those 2 areas and also bring back what used to be there, a marsh system. And in addition to that, one unique feature of this is also we're installing mussels, shellfish throughout the system. There is a nonprofit in the area that breeds juvenile mussels, and then we're seeding the entire project with mussel habitat. Next slide. And then this one is an area that's not very urbanized, a very severely eroding shoreline where there needed to be stability, presented to this area, something more than what was going on. So back to my original slide looking at, well, what are the physical mechanisms causing this chronic and severe erosion, and how do we protect it? So it had a series of breakwaters with plantings behind it. Next slide. And then this one on Staten Island, very much a representation of thinking differently in that it's a shore protection project prompted from Hurricane Sandy, and it provides a mosaic of different ways. We could have walled off a seawall around the entire community. That would have provided ample protection. But there was a strong desire, obviously, to think of it differently. Let's bring the community involved. And there's a mosaic, as you see, reinforced buried dunes, also buried revetments, and then eco-friendly revetments along more active areas of it. So anyways, we'll hear from the panelists and myself approaching it differently, thinking outside the box, and trying to make sure we do things better. So,
All right, Christine.
Yeah.
Last but not least.
Okay, excellent. I'll keep it short in my intro comments here. It's really nice to see all of you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christine Angelini. I'm actually from outside of this area. I've spent most of my career working in Florida and other parts of the country. So I'm going to dose this conversation a little bit with some perspectives from other places. But for a long time in my career, I was a professor at the University of Florida, and really in the pursuit of understanding, using data like that Heather and her team have collected to understand what's driving change in coastal systems. You can go to the next slide. And the changes in our coastal systems are pretty significant. This is a wetland complex in Northeast Florida that I've worked in. It's a site that over the time that I've worked in this region of the state, which is about 15 years, I've literally actively seen it transition from a contiguous coastal system to something where the wetland is falling apart, and we've got oyster reefs actually emerging in this system. And it's really driven by essentially a stress sandwich. On the sort of the upland side of this system, we've got groundwater rise driven by sea level rise, inundating many, many septic tanks in and around the city of St. Augustine and other wastewater infrastructure, driving excess nutrient pollution coupled with kind of a lot of development. And on the landward side, we've got incessant boat traffic. About a boat traveling by this wetland every 3 minutes during daytime hours. And so this is a system sandwiched between those stressors. You can click ahead, Charles. And what we're inevitably seeing is essentially a wetland that's falling apart. And the reason why I want to kind of highlight this is that this is a system that's experiencing not just groundwater rise, but changes in water quality. And as these wetlands are falling apart, they're actually contributing to water quality changes themselves, right? These wetlands are holding together a whole bunch of nutrients in the soil, but also a lot of sediment. And as they're falling apart, they're sort of contributing not only turbidity, but nutrients to the system. So these are kind of runaway feedbacks that can really be exacerbated. So you can go ahead. Fortunately, even in systems like this is a coastal wetland in California, and it's Elkhorn Slough near Monterey. If any of you have gone kayaking there, it's a beautiful place. You can see some amazing wildlife, including sea otters. But this is a system that is highly eutrophic, dealing with a lot of nutrient pollution from upstream agriculture, significantly hydrologically modified. And we've noticed it, too, is falling apart. The creek banks are eroding at about 70 centimeters a year. But we've leveraged long-term data and water quality data, including that, collected by agencies like the NEARS. And what we've been able to diagnose is that there's some actually natural solutions at work in this system helping stabilize it under these extreme stressors. So you can click ahead. In fact, what we've been finding is that the conservation and recovery of sea otters in this system, they eat a lot of the shore crabs that are burrow on the banks of these marshes. And this consumption of crabs is actually leading to a significant reduction in creek erosion rates because the grass is healthier in this system. And the reason why I wanted to highlight this is that this is an example of nature helping nature in a system that is in a state of sort of decline, but it's significantly slowing the rate and the pattern of that decline. And it's a feel-good story, and it generates a lot of other kind of human benefits in the process. So as we think about solutions, I think thinking about not just implementing a whole wetland, but sometimes it's preserving other parts of the food web to help those wetlands is the kind of solutions we need. Go ahead. I've just got two more quick things. Our company also works a lot on, understanding the pervasive effects of groundwater rise. This is an example of work that we've just been starting in the city of Oakland in California. What you're seeing in sort of blue is where we have predicted coastal hazards from, storm surge and sort of traditional surface sea level rise. But all of that area in sort of purple hashing is where we've got groundwater rise, right? It's sort of, this is a prediction, it's a visualization. But the reason why I wanted to put this up is not because this is exactly where groundwater rise is going to start to kind of merge and sort of push up on the surface and influence transportation infrastructure and residential areas here. But I think these visualizations of where are we going to see these kind of emerging effects of groundwater rise pop up. And it's not just immediately along the shoreline, right? It's kind of creepy. It's, and a sneaky sort of stressor in the system. And that's starting to see these visualizations now and starting to think about what are some creative solutions and also some opportunities that can be generated as our landscape changes is the kind of conversations we really need to be starting with communities. And the last one, it's not just big cities like Oakland, it's small little towns like Kittery, Maine. This is a visualization of the effects of groundwater rise affecting the road network here. And this is not only going to affect the transport of goods and tourists from I-95 into the town of Kittery, which is critical for its kind of sustainability, but also the day-to-day getting around town of people that live there. And so I think both of those kind of macro scale and micro scale economic drivers of and solutioning around that are going to be really key. So I'll leave that and look forward to the discussion.
Okay. Thank you. So, panel. We have a series of questions we're going to bring up to you, and we'd like your... Oops, forgot about this thing. You're going to yell at me now. We have a series of questions that we're going to bring up. We're not going to have time to go through every question, but we will try to hit some of them. Some of them will be directed to the entire panel, and like to have everyone's feedback. In some instances, we will be asking specific people for their inputs. And so we'll start out here and we'll go for a little bit, and then we'll give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. Okay. So having seen these perspectives, panelists, how should we rethink the watershed as one interconnected system, and what does that mean for how we plan, design, and manage the built environment alongside natural systems and water quality? And this is directed to all of you. Who would like to go first?
I'll give it a first shot. Well, I think at the forefront has to be collaboration. As Charles mentioned, there are so many elements that go in to a coastal project. And let's face it, if you're dealing with a project on the coast, it's incredibly dynamic, literally dynamic, ever-changing. So collaboration to make sure, as I mentioned in one of my slides, that you're taking a full systems approach. Now, for most of our clients, at times, that can be frustrating because they've got a direct ask of what they want. They want it done fast. But educating them, as well as the public, on making sure you take a holistic approach to projects, because it will benefit you long term, and proving that and demonstrating that, I think, is key.
I'll go next because I completely agree that we need to take an integrated approach, and I want to look through it through the infrastructure lens, coming from the MTA, dealing a lot with gray infrastructure, active rail system. You know, our infrastructure, as I sort of alluded to on my first slide, is so intertwined with DEP's infrastructure, with DOT's, Con Ed's, But the fact is, water knows no bounds. And so in order to do successful stormwater management, we really need to work together, and I'm proud to say that we do. I coordinate daily or weekly at least with DEP, with DOT, with Con Ed. We have very, very strong partnerships. We work together to find equitable, cost-effective solutions to these cloudburst events that we're experiencing more and more. You know, and I think with ownership issues, with infrastructure, I think they can sometimes be troublesome or difficult or challenging. But I'm proud to say that we do work through them, and we do come to the table, and we're able to find common ground. We're able to find projects that don't just benefit one infrastructure agency, but multiple infrastructure agencies. And I think that's what we need for stormwater management going forward.
I can hop in, so we don't go down the line. And I think along what Erin was saying, that that invisible bounds, the water really doesn't know any of that. On the Hudson itself, we have a lot of dynamics all working together. I think that working with our communities, having them better understand what the river will anticipate. We've already experienced likely over a foot of sea level rise in the last 100 years. We're anticipating more of that in the future. In addition, any storm that we have is becoming more intense, so we do have more intense storms on top of that. And if you're not aware, the Catskill Mountains are actually just a plateau of unconsolidated material. So through our changes, we're also eroding the Catskill Mountains down through the Hudson into the harbor, into the ocean. So we're also moving a lot of sediment through the Hudson. And all of those systems will happen naturally. In the midst of that, we've dredged it for commercial use. We put 2 rail lines on either side, and we've put a lot of vertical wall and commercial fills, so that the river itself has no way to actually buffer that flood in the future if we don't give it some space. And so the challenge that we have is that we have private ownership, we have different community development, we have different community preparedness for flooding. And so the river doesn't know that property line. So we as a community have to really think about what do we expect to happen in the future, how can we adjust, and also understand a little bit better about what the Hudson is going to do in the future. So I think collaboration is key. I think long-term planning and recognizing that the river actually and the water actually doesn't recognize our political lines that we've put on the ground.
And just one last quick comment, which is I think the local scale solutions that are addressing multiple forms of stressors really do matter, whether it's the small, like the raising events that really affects a given station. That really matters on the nature side, you know, and in the world that I mostly work in. You know, smaller stormwater wetland systems that provide flood storage and water quality benefits distributed all across the watershed. Collectively, those small local actions that reduce stressors matter at the macro scale. And so I think while the global stressors affecting the system seem so daunting, I do think that the local work is really important to take on.
Thank you. Okay, next one, and this is going to be directed to Erin and to Jeff, so I'll let you guys prepare yourselves. Okay, we're talking about ecology influencing infrastructure, but infrastructure also actively reshapes water behavior. So Erin, from the MTA perspective, what risks are becoming chronic rather than episodic, and how does that affect capital planning? How do you plan for water pressures that aren't tied to a single storm event?
Yeah. So just variations on the same theme of stormwater management. These events are coming more frequently. Our system was down for Ida. Our system was partially down for Ophelia. Also, all the other unnamed storms that have happened since then. And so it's no longer just preparing for a single storm. It's true. We had a major storm back in August 2007, and that was sort of the wake-up call that these storms were coming, and that's when we implemented that first generation of raised vents that I showed. But since then, I think the idea that those storms that we're not going to experience those has given way to what we see now, which is that this is the new normal. So what our team does is we're trying to be proactive. So we track these storms, we track where the impacts are happening, and we're looking at the projections to understand where we need to invest in these passive mitigations before the storms come. So that's one thing that we're relying on. We're also taking, I mentioned my DEP colleagues, we're taking a page from DEP's book, and we're also doing H&H modeling, so stormwater flood risk modeling. So because these storms are so hyper-local and they affect our stations differently, it truly is whack-a-mole depending on the trajectory of the storm. We have to do modeling to really understand what is that risk at the surface level and how would that impact our station. So which entrances are vulnerable to flooding, which vents are vulnerable to flooding, how vulnerable are they, how high do we need to raise them to mitigate that risk. So this is now something that we're integrating into our capital projects, and before we build and as we redo stations, renewals, ADA projects, we have this opportunity to do this modeling and to proactively raise these assets. So how does it impact capital planning? We're trying to be proactive about it. We're trying to be more data driven and trying to protect these fixed assets before they're impacted.
Thank you. All right, Jeff, and for you, you've overseen both large-scale marsh restoration and engineered shoreline systems. Where do ecological goals and infrastructure protection come into tension, and how do you resolve that?
Well, I think I'm going to roll right off of what Erin said. We have tools in our toolbox to help us, whether it's data, models, to make decisions on going forward. But one thing that we underemphasize, I believe, in the industry is the monitoring of project performance. Projects are so driven, as I mentioned before, on addressing a specific issue, dealing with it, and then moving on. It's almost like it's forgotten. But one of the key tools that is emerging and should continue to emerge is looking at, well, we had design criteria of X. We then presented a project that was Y. Don't walk away. Watch it, monitor it, see how it performs, learn from it. I drive this with my group, as well as I also teach at Rutgers with students. Understand the adaptation of projects based on performance is very key. Learn from, did something work as you predicted, or did you completely miss the boat on it? So how does that branch from design and addressing the question? Well, again, use the best tools possible, get into a design, but also stress to clients, stakeholders. There's also a maintenance component to the project, and it may not be spending money, but it may be money on retrofitting a project, but it's also monitoring how is it performing and learning from that. So when you either deal with that project or another one, you've learned from that. So you're constantly building, say, throughout your career or your organization. So as time goes on, you're benefiting overall.
Thank you, guys. All right, next question. The overall question is, if water will permanently occupy space both above and below ground, what must cities stop doing and what must they start doing? So, Heather, the first question is oriented to you. You smile there. Where do current regulatory or funding structures actively prevent integrated watershed thinking?
Well, I represent a department that does a lot of regulatory, so I don't know that we would want to say that we prevent it, but I think it is challenging because, one of the challenges that we are dealing with is that we're reviewing a project proposal that's come to us, right? And so we can't proactively tell somebody you should do this. We can give them resources, we can encourage, we can give them the tools for a community, but it's really a locally driven, and our communities and our municipalities actually are the leads on our seeker evaluations. They're the ones that are leading what the character of their towns are. So from a regulatory standpoint, we have to encourage communities to think about the future. We can't mandate it, and so we're oftentimes reviewing a project as it comes in, and we have to encourage the community. So I will say it's also a challenge because we often want to ask questions. So your proposal has to be evaluated as to what's it going to impact for the neighbor. And that can be challenging as an applicant, right? You have to think about not just your project, but also anticipate what it might do for the neighbor, because we might ask that question. So I think people might perceive that it's a challenge to get through the regulatory process, but because we represent New York State, we really have to think about what our project and what we're going to permit and what that impact is going to be to the neighbor. What's it going to be like in 5 to 10 years? You know, our role is to not just look at this today, but sea level rise modeling, and look at the predictive and try and anticipate what that will do for both that shoreline, but the habitat near it, and the long-term viability of that. So it's a big job for us, and as an applicant, oftentimes perceived as a challenge for them, but it is a challenge that's required for us to really think about long-term resilience.
Yeah, I just jump in here. And of course, my work, I do a lot of interaction with DEP, and so I recognize very strongly all the points that you brought up, because a lot of people come into projects like this thinking that, you know, the state regulatory agency is really able to drive much of this stuff. But you're basically working with projects that come in, and your overarching guidance is, does it adhere to the regulations? And that's where you have to be. And a lot of people don't understand that, so I do empathize with the things that you have to deal with. So, Christine, a question for you. What would it look like to design infrastructure that evolves ecologically over time?
It's a big question, and I'm sure I see a lot of, especially young faces in the audience, and so, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit in terms of generational changes. I've heard a lot in the discussions today about the timescales of the sea level rise, and something that I think about is how much are the systems that I've been studying going to be changing by the time I'm retired or at the end of my life? You know, how much change will I see cumulatively over a lifetime? And I think we have this opportunity to start seed setting, because of the timescales of sea level rise, what that future kind of evolution of our shoreline looks like, and starting to get people acclimated, I think, to what it could be. So things that come to mind for me, I work a lot in oyster reefs, but how do we design sort of not just what's immediately in the intertidal zone now for oysters, but actually in the next 15 or 20 years, and creating structures that are amenable to becoming part of the intertidal zone in the future. And I think for people to see, this is actually part of the trajectory of my lifetime, it potentially, is to see this begin to get colonized over time. And that could be applicable literally to the intertidal zone within some of our coastal parks. But to the example that I showed of the map of Oakland is visualizing inland wetlands that are going to exist because ground level rise comes up so far that what used to be underground is now at the surface. And so starting to implant on, infrastructure that's there, the idea that this is a future wetland, and getting people acclimated and starting to kind of psychologically mature for an alternative future. So from my perspective, I think some of this has to do with a little bit of design elements, but more than anything, engaging communities in starting to visualize what their ecological future could look like strategically.
Okay, very good, very good.
And I don't know, do you have something to?
No, I was just going to say, I think we're supposed to leave time for
6 minutes. Okay. Oh, I really wanted to throw this last one at you because I changed it. Okay, so we have.
Give it to the audience.
Yeah, we have 6 minutes left. So if there's anyone there who would like to ask a question, please raise your hand. If you're called upon, please stand up, speak loudly. So back there in the back. So stand up, please.
Hello. Just actually piggybacking off of your last statement about...
Speak into the microphone.
Sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. Testing. Okay. Piggybacking off of your last statement about what our ecological future looks like and kind of prepping the communities to get acclimated to that. In the aspect that they might lose their home, how do we prepare them or get acclimated? Because then it's, okay, now I have to really think about changing my whole life, changing a community that maybe was here for 3 generations. So what is that, I guess, thought process on, being sensitive to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I live in a state that's gotten hammered by hurricanes in the last few years. I work really closely with residents that live in communities. City of Cedar Key has gotten hit with 3 hurricanes in a 5-year period. And we're literally seeing that community go through migration, significant changes in sort of socio-demographics in that community. And really what's happened is those that are wealthy enough to rebuild are rebuilding. Those that are at middle income that can afford to relocate are relocating, and those that can't afford to relocate are living in homes that were flooded, damaged, and just trying to get by. So this speaks very closely to something that I'm seeing in communities that I love and care deeply about residents of. And as I said, I think some of these changes are in a generational time scale where it's... But I think in the sense of informing future decisions and younger generations in those communities of what does your future look like, that this is something that we need to do is using data, model-derived information, the best science that we have to start seeding some of those community discussions. So I'm not saying that I think that can be done with sensitivity, but also be done in a way that it's actually an opportunity. So the last thing I'll say is in Cedar Key, it has been long a fisheries-based economy. They are now thinking about how they can leverage greening up their landscape to drive ecotourism, to drive greater bird use, to bring out more birders into that area. And how do they think about an economic future for people that love natural resources there and have long lived there, but that looks and feels different than before. And so I think this can be done with cultural and economic sensitivity.
Okay.
With that being said, moving a community is something that has been contemplated along the Hudson. The village of Piermont has contemplated for over a decade, and it's not made very much progress because a community is more than just a house. It's the bakery, it's the restaurant, it's the dog walk that you took, it's your neighbors. So we're finding it very difficult to find a way to move communities because community is just not just houses. And so finding in our Hudson Valley area, it's very difficult to find upland area that is safe to create a brand new village. So I will say that this is something that's top of mind, but we haven't actually had progress over the last decade because of the complexity. And I do think it'll end up being a generational kind of shift over time.
Any other questions? Do we have another? One more question. Yes. You.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Izzy. I'm a Bard MBA and Sustainability student, and thank you so much for having me. I wanted to ask, I live up in the Hudson Valley area, and noting on like erosion you're saying and the Catskills, and I know all of my life the Hudson River has been like, don't go there, essentially. What might be some thoughts or hopes and maybe even to you, Heather, projects that are coming soon, forefront, to try and bring the Hudson River back to life, and then all the benefits afterwards.
I can say that I cringe a little bit when somebody says it's not doing well. Actually, it's doing amazing in that way, which is that the water qualities have been significant improvements. We've gotten to see, and we are the host of the highest population of the short-nosed sturgeon in the Atlantic, in the New York Bight. So we're doing something right. I do think that the water quality has improved. But I think as we go forward, that's not good enough we're going to have to do a little bit more than that. One of the things that we're finding is that intertidal shallow water habitat is not something that we can easily recreate or expand. And so over time, that's where we have to focus. We are in a really sad shape for shad and herring, and they really need that shallow water refuge habitat. And when we dredge it and we put railroads on either side, we haven't given the river space to expand. So over time, I think that's where we need to focus. I think we make incremental improvements to water quality. We have 7 communities that take their drinking water from the Hudson. We host recreational swims. We have some really great fishing. We haven't gotten yet back to commercial fisheries. So, but we just now from Department of Health provided guidance that now allows every person in our population to at least eat 1 fish out of the Hudson, which is a huge change. We had, I know, it's like, that's what we're celebrating, but for a while some population was not able to eat at least 1. So now we're making improvements. So I do think we're making improvements, but it's not because we didn't we had to continue making investments and move on a trajectory.
And I think that's about it.
Yeah.
Unless someone has
Some more questions.
a burning question.
I think this, yeah.
Hi, I'm Sama from the Cooper Union. I'm doing my master's there in research and waterfront engineering. I have one quick question. So, considering the amazing things that you guys have presented to us, what would the future of specifically the East River be, and what are the challenges that are preventing us from doing that? Thank you.
I'll just jump in there. The East River is got so much going on, right? We have commercial, we have ferry traffic, we have erosion, we have high volume of water. So over time, I think what's going to end up happening is doing the best we can. There's erosion right now. So there's a lot of, right now, restoration projects that are proposed. And so incrementally making improvements on those shorelines, creating better park space so people have access to the river, and dampening some of the wave action and the shipping traffic erosion that's happening there. But each of the projects that are being proposed are also expanding public space. So I think that's the key. That's where we need to go. But there's a lot of pressure on the East River. There's a lot of both traffic, commercial, industrial use, and also critical space for our fish movement. So.
We do have to end it there.
If it's real quick.
But we can stay after.
Yeah, if you can also ask them right afterwards.
Yep.
And that it's more personal that way too. Well, thank you guys very much.